So this is an absolute honor, and what I really want is you guys to understand who, not just his accomplishment, but who he is as a man coming out of this. Some of you know his story, some of you don't, but we held the same job. He held the job I held. We grew up very differently. My dad was a professor at the University of Chicago, had a PhD. My mother had a master's. I grew up on the campus of U of C. Pedro was the oldest of 12 with parents with a second grade education. And so what he and his siblings have done in one generation is truly extraordinary. So before we get to today and what's going on, just give folks a little sense of what it was like growing up in that household.
Yeah, so Arne, thank you. So born in Mexico, everyone, but grew up in Chicago, Lower West Side. My father worked 2 jobs his whole life. But one of the things he taught myself and my siblings was the value of hard work and, frankly, the value of education. And he never got a chance to go to school. Both him and my mother, weren't allowed. And so I was able to finish high school. I was in Benito, all CPS, all Chicago Public Schools. And frankly, looking back, it was teachers who saw something in me, but they were working in very under-resourced conditions. In my year that I graduated with about 170 of us, but we had started with 700 freshmen. And that experience has always shaped my leadership because, at that time, just knowing that so many students had dropped out, was able to finish college. And because I finished high school and college, every one of my siblings, who I never even realized were, watching everything I did, finished high school. Everybody did something beyond high school. Had 3 teachers in the family, a nurse, a soldier, and there's also, just many success stories. And I was telling Arne, now we're at the point now where my nephews and nieces, because I'm the oldest of 12, but we still have a lot of young, including my own children, they're still young. I'm starting to see nephews starting to graduate from college. And I'll tell you, when you see the true power of education eliminating poverty is when you start seeing those shifts within a generation. All that to say, and then coming out of college, I went into the consulting world because I needed to get a job right away. And never thought I would be in education. And then I found myself at the Archdiocese of Chicago because my mother always wanted me to be a priest. I mean, I think she was the most devoted Catholic you're ever going to meet. And when I got offered to join the Archdiocese by Cardinal Bernardin at the time, my mother pretty much gave me the lecture of, remember who you are, remember who helped us when we came to this country. And then I got to meet Arne. And the funny story I'll tell you, when I met Arne had just been the CEO maybe in his second year, and he was creating a team to really help improve the school district. And I had no interest in actually, working at CPS. I wanted to give Arne a piece of my mind because of all, knowing how many students did not graduate, the fact that those of us who graduated never felt prepared for college. And I wanted to, when do you get a chance to talk to the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools? And frankly, that conversation changed my life because then Arne shared his vision and his mission. And basically, without saying it, pretty much said, you can join and be part of the solution, or you can watch from afar and continue to be a critic. And because of that, and the experience in Chicago, I got mentored by Arne and others to really go into the educational side, was able to go get my certifications, became number 2 in Southern Nevada, number 1 in Northern Nevada, 7 years in San Antonio after that. And then I got a call, and I guess who called me again about, hey, both Arne and at that time a good friend of mine, Janice Jackson, who was the CEO, called me and said, look, we really could use your help. And I remember saying, I'm happy here in San Antonio. My contract has been renewed twice. I've been through, we went from the lowest performing school district in the state to the fastest improving school district in the state. The Commissioner Marath, who, was right there, who stood with me and said, this district is going to show that poverty will not determine destiny. And a lot of success. And something just called to me to go back to Chicago. The district was in distress. It was right in the fall of 21, a few months before the peak of the pandemic, a few months before the 3rd walkout in 3 years had happened in the district. By the way, none of this I really understood or knew because I probably would have stood in San Antonio. And, and it was a calling for me to say, this is, I had been with Arne for almost 6 years, and we put in some amazing systems. And when do you get a chance to go back to your home district, 12 years being gone, and say, okay, what's stuck? right? So the fact that now we have, and we had seen significant improvements in many metrics, but we had started to peak because of the pandemic, and then of course, proficiency, everything declined significantly, and I could feel the fear of our principals and our teachers. I could feel it. And I remember the first year, talking to the board and to the mayor at the time, I said, look, we need to stabilize the system. We need to build trust because our children are barely coming back to school. They're not, they're struggling. And so that first year, we stabilized the system. And then now I'm finishing my 4th year. And like I said, I'm more than happy to tout the successes. But again, for me, as being a product of public education, I am convinced in the bottom of my heart, there is no more powerful equalizer as long as we all work together to really give children a chance to come out of poverty. There's just nothing else. Everything else that I've ever worked with in terms of, helping children, that are homeless or children that are, get stuck in the system, at the end of the day, the avenue that what really helps to really help children out of poverty is really education, everybody. And so for me, that's why I'm so committed to this work.
Two quick stories. I want to be a priest. This is confession time. But I remember when he came in as our budget director, it was just not how sharp and thoughtful and challenging, and never told me what I wanted to hear. It always told me what I didn't want to hear, but it was the truth and needed to hear. But I remembered his 2 younger sisters came to the office almost every day to get tutored. And not that he was a surrogate parent, but that was very different for us. And they were like just part of our team. And in fact, they're grown up now and doing remarkable.
One is a teacher.
Yeah, one's a teacher. But that was, he's a different human being, different sense of values. The other thing that the mayor who hired him, we had mayoral control. I'm going to get into that. She and I weren't always on the same page. So when Janice was leaving, I called her staff. I said, I don't care what the mayor thinks of me. I said, there's only one person in the country who can do this job. And it's Pedro Martinez. And I didn't know Janice told them the same thing. They probably listened to Janice and not me. But there was, had he not been willing to do it, I don't know who could have filled those shoes. But what did it mean to you coming back as a Chicago boy to come back home and keep building upon this work?
For me, Arne, just so one thing that I was so proud of, in CPS. So I shared with you, how many children graduated in my year in 1987, and so when I was with Arne, our graduations were at 40%, and I remember being so angry, but I didn't know who to be angry at. And now, and then fast forward over a decade with Arne's leadership and multiple leaders, the graduation rate had started hitting, now we're at 82% now, but we really doubled it over a couple of decades. And then what's even more important for me, more personal, we are seeing more children today. Not only are we seeing record graduation rates, we have one of the highest college going rates in the country. 70% of our students, by the way, 73% persist among the highest of urban districts. And we're also seeing more than half our children graduating with college credit. And so for me, Arne, to be able to give back to the system, who gave so much to me, I always said this, this was never about a job. And like I said, I'll tell you, my board in San Antonio were in tears. My staff were in tears because they knew, they're like, Pedro, we know the only place we can't compete with is your hometown. And we get it. It's your hometown. And so being able to come back and make the difference. But more importantly, even with all the drama that's happened, to have 80% of my campuses, when things got really bad, literally went out publicly and said, we're backing this leader, we trust this leader. And Arne knows this. Our school leaders, they're very vocal. They don't usually come together. The way they did. But what it was is, I think what I'm proud of is my team and I, we were able to show what it meant to lead with integrity. What it meant to really talk about how do we make sure that the structures are in place that are supporting our teachers and our students when, and I always told this to my team, when we didn't have any power. Right? For the first time, the union was able to elect one of their own to become the mayor, and we got into some ugly politics. And by the way, it was never about the bigger vision, but it became so ugly about wanting to weaken our evaluation system, wanting to weaken our ability for principals to have rigorous curriculum, to have rigorous instruction. And I'll say this, everybody, and I have 3 sisters that are teachers in the system, strong union members. Teaching is really hard. It is really complex. I have so much respect for our teachers, and especially because I've been in multiple systems, and I can tell you, Chicago has some of the strongest teachers in the country, but they need a lot of support. And our children, because over 70% of our children live in poverty, they need a lot of support. And what we were able to put in place is these structures that really gave our children a fighting chance. And I'll just give you a couple of metrics. So we have one of the most rigorous assessment systems in the country. Illinois, is around number 5 in rigor when you look at the state assessments. And so our proficiency rates are lower across the state because of that. By the way, for the entire state. And yet, when you look at our gains we've had in the last 2 years, record gains, some of these gains are like 50% gains in some of these subgroups, from low bases, by the way, but more importantly, when you look underneath the data, consistent growth across the campuses, led by our Black and Latinx students. And what I always tell our high schools, you guys, the reason, I love you guys so much, and I have a little bit of a bias for the high schools, is that you meet children where they're at, and look what you're doing with our children. Imagine as these cohort of students are moving up the system, because by the way, what we see in Chicago is that our children are at the lowest at 3rd grade in proficiency level. The highest proficiency rates are in 8th grade. So the longer they stay in our system, the stronger they get academically, and then the high schools come in and they swoop in, and I'll tell you, they meet them where they're at, and then we see the results that I shared with you earlier. And so for me, maintaining the strength of that system was so important. And again, it was work built on by, during your era, Arne, the leaders that followed you. And by the way, I was telling Arne, I will be the 2nd longest serving CEO after Arne. Janice was just underneath me after I finished this year. We've had more than 10 CEOs in this last, decade and a half. And so all of that to say, everybody, this was always more about making sure that we respected the work, that we really, respected what was happening in our classrooms. And like I said, I just couldn't be prouder of the results. And mark my words, this year will be our strongest year ever. All of our indicators are showing that.
It's a fascinating and honestly heartbreaking story. It's like a soap opera, but it's real. And the part where Pedro will always be a friend for life, but for me, it's really not about our friendship. It's about what he's done to help kids. But lots of people I'm friends with, I don't want to run the Chicago Public Schools. But his fiscal integrity, becoming a true, learn over time to become an extraordinary instructional leader, having Chicago a long way to go. This is not mission accomplished by any stretch, but one of the fastest improving school districts. And I always say education should be the ultimate non-political, nonpartisan, bipartisan issue. But let's be clear, education is also very, very political. So here you have a son of Chicago, comes back home, one of the superstars coming out of the district, comes back, managing it fiscally, extraordinarily responsibly, never any integrity or ethical issues. And by the way, we had a previous superintendent go to jail, so this is, Chicago. And on top of that, to have extraordinary progress, growth. And yet, the politics fell apart for you. And I don't want to sugarcoat anything. And for folks that don't know the story, if you can just take a second and walk through what didn't work politically.
Yeah, so everybody, our board has always been appointed, since 1995 by the mayor. So, and even though the CEO reports directly to the board, the reality is the mayor always feels like they're in control. And so when Mayor Lightfoot lost, I knew there was risk because Mayor Johnson, who had been part of the teachers union, I knew there was going to be a chance that, that I may not last, but I decided, you know what, at the end of the day, I know what's right for children, and I know the success. So I showed him the work, and he was actually very impressed. He's like, oh my God, Pedro, I've taught for a couple of years, but I don't know any of this. I don't know how you're getting graduation rate gains, kids going to college credit. By the way, strong partnerships with the unions. A lot of our children started enjoying the trades. And so we developed that, and I started developing that trust level. And then we get to the point where we get into a sticky issue about negotiations are about to start with the union. And we showed our cards, everybody. We were like, you know what, look, here's what we can do. Our teachers are among the highest paid in the country. I want to keep them there. Here's what we can do. And when the resources weren't enough, his first go-to was, you should go and borrow. And I had to explain to him, we're the largest junk bond producer in the country, second to Puerto Rico. We have $9 billion of debt. There was $200 million of interest-only payments that I'm making today that's part of our deficit from bad borrowings from a few years ago. None of it under him, by the way. So I'm thinking, okay, I can rationalize this, right? And then his board he appointed, which we didn't always agree on everything, but they actually sided with me on this. And so we're like, okay, like we're all on the same page here. Let's figure out a revenue instead, a more responsible way. And then he just took it personal. He took it personal and said, you turned the board against me. You're just, nobody else has ever said no to their mayor. Why are you doing this? And he asked me to resign. And I said, I'm sorry, but I actually don't report to you. I actually report to the board. And you can imagine that was not an answer that was well received. It got ugly. He put pressure on the board. The board resigned en masse, all 7 of them.
Why did they resign?
Because he was, and there's emails where he was forcing them to try to fire me and to take out these loans, and they just said no. And so they resigned en masse. He appointed a new board who their only job was to fire me. And so, by the way, as by state law, a new hybrid board was coming on board, 21 board members, 10 elected, 11 still controlled by him. And so right before that, a special board meeting right before Christmas, they decided to terminate my contract. But in my contract, what it said is if they terminate me for no fault or my contract for no fault, I can still finish the school year. You can imagine they offered me quite a bit to leave, and I said no. I need to make sure that we finish out the year. And what's interesting, everybody, is that, and this is what gives me a lot of optimism for the district, when the board does become a fully elected school board in 2 more years, 7 of the 10 elected board members today would extend my contract, would reverse the termination of my contract in a heartbeat. They just don't have the numbers. So that tells me that in the long term, Arne, 2 years from now, our public understands what's right for our district. They are electing the right leaders. It just happens in this time. It was just the timing didn't work out for me. But by the way, everybody, still, finishing 4 out of 5 years of my contract and finishing the year strong, I still count my blessings every day because my team is amazing and we've always worked with integrity.
And final question, this is a time, whether it's locally in Chicago or nationally, when there's a tremendous amount of fear, when lots of folks might think, let me go hide, let me disappear. And you have been an absolute profile in courage. You have lived your values in a way that I think as a nation we have to live our values now and not be scared. So where does that value structure, where does your moral compass come from? And what kept you going during those really tough times, and where does your courage come from?
So Arne, one of the things I feel so blessed is, first of all, the team around me, including my school leaders, my cabinet leaders, some of them in the room, even teachers, I never felt so much support and so humbled by it, by the way. And of course, my family. And the only thing I will say, and I have a lot of colleagues that are struggles around the country. I will tell you, whether you're on the extreme left or extreme right, neither one of those sides, are really, they don't have all the answers. I'll just say that. And at this time, I saw, Arne, that if I didn't stand up in the role as visible as I am, with the support I had from so much in the community, now no power, but still a lot of support, I needed to make a stance to show everybody. Because otherwise, if I don't stand up, how can I tell another leader in another district, in another city, in another organization to stand up for their values and look at them in the face? So for me, it really was, it was something that, again, when it's the system that really gave me everything I got, I felt I owed it to the district, to the families, but frankly, even to all the leaders before me, because these systems, everybody, and this is, I'll say this final note, when we design the strategies for our district, and this has been always my mantra in any organization I work, we build a 10-year plan. And you act like you're going to be there for 10 years because it's about putting the structures in place. It's about changing the culture, building the trust level. And then, if you have to leave, hopefully you can bring, you have somebody that can continue that work, because at the end, these systems, these organizations are so powerful. And if you're children of poverty, everybody, this is all they got. You know, adults have advocates, right? Our employees have unions, our vendors have advocates. But our kids, we have to be the advocates. And these systems are all they got.
So just as a lifelong Chicagoan who loves my city as much as it breaks my heart some days, I just want to thank you for your courage. I want to thank you for your service. And on behalf of the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children who, like you, may not have had the most educated of parents, but had parents that had big dreams for them, your help to make those dreams a reality. Please give Pedro a huge round of applause.
Thank you, Arne.